Okay, welcome back everyone. We're on the next part of our Decoding Daniel. And that's right pronunciation, by the way. It's not Daniel or Daniel. It's Daniel, actually, is the correct pronunciation, as I learned by going through this book. And just a quick recap, because we have to do the Netflix thing and just recap where we're up to, because there's a lot that has happened. I'm going to do it in 60 seconds. We know that Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, went into Israel as well as other countries and destroyed the first temple. And then he grabbed a bunch of young boys in order to use them as advisors, future advisors, and he gave them the best food and the best treatment and the best teachers. And one of them was Daniel. He was an incredible individual, a young boy. He stood strong with his faith in God. He kept kosher, although he probably didn't have to because he was in a very difficult place. Babylonia, his family had probably been killed or lost or whatever. And there he was, an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he interprets his dream about the future kingdoms that would come and would dominate the Jewish people until Mashiach's arrival. And we mentioned that Barbanel says that revelation, that dream that he has, that Daniel interpreted, actually is an understanding, a revelation, because Daniel was one of the two people who knew Mashiach's exact arrival time, which is why this book is very cryptic and written primarily in an unusual form of Aramaic. And so Daniel was able to see, says Barbanel, there will be a future war between the Notzrim, Christian world, and the Muslim world, and the Jewish people will be involved somehow in the land of Israel around Yerushalayim. And that will be the final battle of good and evil right before Mashiach comes. That was that revelation. And then Nebuchadnezzar took it a little bit too far, made a very large golden statue of himself. Some say it was actually a form of idol worship. The Abarbanel and others say no, he just wanted to show that people should honor him as a great individual. And because of that, he was greatly punished. He had another dream about a tree that got chopped down, if you remember. And that actually led him to go completely crazy and live in the fields for a long amount of time, we said last week, like an animal. And eventually he came back to his senses, like the madness of King George is the madness of Nebuchadnezzar. We said last week that he got back to his senses and he actually regained his previous power. And then he gave great thanks to the God of Israel, realizing that all of his problems that had come upon him were because of the way he treated the Jewish people and these young boys who had taken in. Nebuchadnezzar is now out of the picture. We're not told what happens to him, but the next part happens. And we're about to meet his grandson. And his grandson's name is Belshazzar. Belshazzar. Okay? Although Daniel is also called Belteshazzar, which is one of the names of Nebuchadnezzar's gods. This is a different individual. This is Belshazzar, who is referred to as the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but most commentators say it wasn't a son, it's actually his grandson. Well, we're missing a link then, aren't we? If Nebuchadnezzar is here, and his grandson is Belshazzar, and that's what the story is about to go, dealing with this complete and utter meshugana, then what about the years in between? Well, there's 23 years that are missing from the story at this point, because Nebuchadnezzar did have had a son, and his name was Evil-Merodach. And he is not mentioned over here because nothing really important happened in his time. He just pretty much continued in the ways of his father. And as we mentioned, the book of Daniel, actually all of scriptures are not history books. They're there to teach us important lessons, events, episodes, and actions of people. Some of them really good and some of them really, really bad. So the book jumps down to this Belshazzar. And this is going to sound familiar to you. The opening scene is a party. And when I say a party, I mean a really big, crazy party, of which there are thousands of people attending and wine for 1,000 guests. Some say Belshazzar drank enough for 1,000 people himself. I wouldn't put it past him. This party is very significant. Does anyone remember another party by another great leader that was thrown where there was a lot of wine and a lot of debauchery. They were basically orgies as well. Crazy, crazy parties. That party I'm referring to over there is a party that lasted for 6 months. This one I don't think lasted that long. Do you know whose party I'm referring to? Ahasuerus. He's going to talk a little bit later, okay? After this kingdom of Babylonia, actually Belshazzar is the last leader of Babel. Okay? He's about to see his demise, and things are about to move from the Babylonian exile to the Median, Madai, and Paras. More about that later on. He's the last leader. And so he throws this big party, and he serves the most beautiful foods and drinks, and it's this crazy party, and he celebrates, and he gets dressed up. Who does he get dressed up as? Well, according to Rembrandt, because there is a fantastic drawing by Rembrandt, you can see online, where you see him dressed up, looking at something written on a wall. We're going to get to that because that's about to happen. Rembrandt was obsessed with stories from the Torah, and this is actually one of his very famous paintings. And he got dressed up as the Kohen Gadol. What exactly is going on over here? Why did he make this big party? So there's two opinions, and they're probably both right. Number one, there was an attack by two individuals who were not from Babylonia. They came from other locations. One of them is called Darius, Dariavesh, the first. There's going to be another one later on. And the other one is his son-in-law by the name of Cyrus, Koresh. Now, these two individuals had come to attack. You know, these dictators all come to hurt and attack each other. And they came to attack, and that particular day, Belshazzar took the upper hand. And he got very excited about this, and he throws this big, massive party. That's one opinion. Another opinion, which is probably the real opinion, goes like this. There was a prophecy by someone called Jeremiah the prophet, chapter 29, verse 10 in the book of Jeremiah. And I'm going to read it to you in English. After 70 years, says Jeremiah, talking to the Jewish people who are in Babylonia, well, Belshazzar is, and those 70 years have been completed, I'm going to attend to you, and I'm going to return you, the Jewish people, to your place. So there was a prophecy that was well known by Jew and non-Jew alike, including Belshazzar, and the prophecy was that for 70 years you're going to be in Babylonia, and then Babylonia is going to fall. Now, Belshazzar made an accounting, and his accounting was, wow, it's been 70 years, because my grandfather took control 70 years ago. And today is the completion of 70 years, and the Jewish people are still here, and we're still in power. Look, even this Dariavesh, this Darius, and his son-in-law Cyrus came to attack us, and we won that battle. Oh, the Jews are not going back. And do you know what he did? He threw a big party. And do you know what he served his food and drinks from? The gold and silver that his grandfather had taken from the Beit HaMikdash and from all over Jerusalem. So it had been sealed away, and he says, it's time to crack open the party stuff. And he starts to have this big, massive party, and all these people at the party are drinking and doing terrible things. You can imagine, don't imagine it right now, having this crazy event, drinking the gold and the silver from the Beit HaMikdash. That's not good. In the middle of this party, while everyone is merry and enjoying themselves, a very weird thing happens, which you don't really see something like this, as far as I know, anywhere else in Tanakh. A very open miracle occurs, and a hand appears next to a wall, and we're told that it was next to a candelabra, so it was very well lit. And there's this big white wall, and this hand appears and draws Hebrew letters on the wall. Handwriting on the wall. And Belshazzar, in the middle of this party, sees this, and he absolutely freaks out. And the book of Daniel actually goes into quite a lot of detail how scared he was. He starts to shake, and his legs start to bang against each other, and his clothing, it's going to sound weird, this, starts to split open. He's freaking out because he's seeing this. And he doesn't only see it, Other people see it as well, but he was the only one, so the rabbis, who saw the actual hand do the writing. People saw the hand, and they saw the writing, but he actually saw the hand write these Hebrew letters on the wall. And he's terrified. And so what does he do? He starts to call his advisors, as they always do, these great kings. What's this? This is like crazy. What exactly is all this writing on the wall? And none of them can give him the right answer. Even if they knew Hebrew letters, which many probably did, they didn't know how to answer him. In the middle of this large commotion, in walks in the queen. Now, the queen had been having her own private party. Now, this is very reminiscent of the Purim story, which is going to follow very much the same pattern many years later. And in that party as well, the queen, in that case Vashti, Yamach Shema, is having her party elsewhere. When I was a kid, I thought that this was, a very tznuah party. They're very religious. They have separate party of men and women. I promise you, that's not what was happening over here, my dear friends. This party involved men and involved women and men and women. It was all mixed up. However, she was a very important person. She was the queen. She wasn't going to debase herself and become part of all this, right? But here's the commotion. She walks in. Some say actually that it wasn't his queen. It was actually his grandfather's wife, the queen mother, as we call it in Great Britain. The queen mother. That's who it was. So she walks in. That's why she wasn't part of this entire, thing. And she sees the commotion. She's like, what's going on? And it's like, look at that. There's writing on the wall, and I saw it being written by this hand. And she's like, I got the answer. I remember about this guy called Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar, right, whether your grandfather or my ex-husband, the relationship of this queen, whatever it is, really is amazing at deciphering codes, dreams and codes. He's going to do it. So what do they do? Bring him in. So they bring him in, and there's this big, massive auditorium, and thousands of people are there, and he walks in, and he says to them, if you do this for me, if you are able, actually, if anyone is able, I'm going to give you a third of Babylon. A third of it. This is important. It used to be in those days that Babylon was actually ruled, right, on local areas it was divided into 3 parts, a triumvirate, 3 parts, and the third one, for some reason, was up for grabs. And he says, if you do it, you have the third. He's basically saying, I'm going to make you very, very rich, give you gold and silver, everything you want. Just tell me what this means. Daniel says, I don't need any of that. Don't give me the money, don't give me the gold, but I'll tell you what's on the wall. He was a very straight, yashar person. What appeared on the wall, now there's 2 parts of this. This is not so simple. It took me a long time to get through this. I'm going to just condense it for you. I'm going to tell you what probably appeared. We're not too sure what exactly appeared on the wall. There's 2 opinions, Rav and Shmuel. Rav says that they weren't able, the non-Jewish people who they're trying to, weren't able, although they knew Hebrew letters and knew Hebrew words, to decode these letters on the wall because they appeared in a very unusual way via what's called atbash. Has anyone heard of atbash? Atbash is a mechanism by which letters are transferred to other letters. So when an aleph appears, it's actually a taf. A bet appears, it's a shin. A gimel appears, it's a resh. A dalet appears, it's a kuf. Basically, you're taking the entire Hebrew alphabet and you're folding it in half. And the corresponding letter on the other side, it's like first to last, second to first, second to last, boom, 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 boom. So what appeared on the walls, according to Rav, was yatat adach pugamachta, which means absolutely nothing unless you know the secret code of atbash. That's why they didn't know. The other opinion, which most people go like, it's like, no. What appeared was 3 words. 3 words. Mamtus, nan kafi alarnan, which has absolutely no meaning. And that's why these guys weren't able to decode it. But what they didn't know was, instead of reading from right to left, the 3 lines of letters that appeared on the wall, what they needed to do was read downwards. And this actually was the code. The words that appeared were maneh, takal, ufarsin. So now we know what the letters were. So even if they were able to figure out which they weren't, but Daniel was, He was able to decode it according to either Rav, he knew Atbash, or he knew to read it downwards and not across. So that's what they were doing. However, it's not enough just to know the code. You've got to know what it even means. I can say to you, you've got to figure out the code. Okay, the code is the fox jumped over the moon. You know, something like out of World War II, you know? Yeah, but what does that mean? So Daniel had a double problem. First of all, figuring out what actually was written on the wall, and then to figure out what it actually meant. And it meant something very, very important, which is going to have a major implication for Belshazzar and all the kingdoms that were around him, and it's going to lead to the Purim story and everything else. And now there's different opinions what Daniel saw in it, but in short, maneh means counted. You counted 70 years and you were wrong, but God, He counted 70 years and He got it right. So you made an accounting, the Jewish people, they're still here. I'm your Kohen Gadol. Let's crack out and bring out all the cups and silver. You counted. Maneh. There's another counting that Jeremiah gave, and you got it wrong. You got it wrong. Next is takel. Takel means tough in Aramaic can be switched with a shin. Shakal has been weighed. So the accounting and the accounting has been weighed, evaluated, understood. Ufarsin. Ufarsin has a lot of commentary just on this one word. Actually is paras twice. It's the plural of paras. Paras means Persia. And the Persians are about to take over Belshazzar. Basically, you're saying to him, I've got some bad news for you. You're dead. This is the end of the Babylonian exile, right? You thought that, and this is the end for you. You thought you were going to escape your fate, but Jeremiah said it, and it's happened. You are done. What he does, we're not too sure. Probably freaks out even more. Ufarsin means Paras, Persia, right? Paras has broken you apart. Your kingship is open. You went too far. The question, by the way, many of the rabbis have is, why is he punished so badly when Nebuchadnezzar was able to finish off his life after being punished? And his grandson, he didn't destroy. He just took out a few kalim, a few of the vessels, had a big, party, as they all used to do in those days. What's the big deal? And some say because Nebuchadnezzar didn't know any better. He was just an animal, and that's the way he acted. But Belshazzar, he saw how great the Jewish people were. He learned from his grandfather's. He should have learned from his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar's mistakes. He didn't, and that's actually considered worse. So his kingdom came to an end within a couple of years. Done. I think in the 30th of his reign, it was all done. How did it end? So do you remember we mentioned Darius, right? The Median, Madai, that an area outside of Babel, and his son-in-law, they basically got in and they managed to kill him and they took over the kingdom. So this is now the beginning of the second of the 4 exiles of the Jewish people, because the center of power is going to move from Babylonia to Persia. Right? And that's why the whole Purim story actually takes place in Persia. This is the segue, this is the background story, how it ended up moving from Babylonia into Persia, into Paras, okay? And that's all Achashverosh Purim story that we're not going to get to at all in this series, but that's going to come later on. This is the root of it all. Okay, that's the way it goes. Okay, so now we have Darius in charge, Darius, and he, interesting enough, really likes Daniel. And now, if you think about it, Daniel has been an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar, to Evil Merodach, we don't know about it, but we know he was, and to Belshazzar. And now his 4th boss is about to turn up, and this guy is actually a very, very good person, and he's 62 years old, says the book of Daniel, so he's moving on in life a little bit, and he gets the kingship, okay? And he owns 120 provinces. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? What does it sound familiar of? Achashverosh. How many does he have? 127. He gets 120 from here. and he's going to add another 7. Each one of these dictators come and grabs more and more land from the previous ones, and they grab all the stuff too. By the way, as a side point, Achashverosh is going to grab all the kalim, all the vessels, right, that got passed down to Darius at this point, and then to Cyrus, and he's going to be making his party that he throws, which is the opening story of the Megillah, is not only similar in theme, right, but it's also similar in practice. But what he was a big party and saying, you're not going home, you're staying here with us, right, but now in Paras. So everyone's like claiming control over the Jewish people and control over the land of Israel as well. Okay? Okay. So I forgot to mention something. Daniel was actually gifted with a third of the kingdom. We don't know what he did with it, but he was gifted with it. The 2 other sections, there was like a civil war, and the other people who controlled those 2 and all the people who worked for them got very, very jealous of this successful Jew. Sound familiar? So they're like, okay, this is a problem. This guy Daniel, he's too straight, he's too honest. Why should the Jews get this land and this control over a third of Babylonia, right? That Darius the first likes him and actually was okay with the Jewish people return to the land of Israel, and even started to put things in motion that allowed them to do that. Okay? These 2 other viziers, which is the way of saying these 2 other controllers, they're like, listen, we've got to get rid of this Jew. We don't want Jews having we want to use them as advisors, right? How does it always work? But we don't want them to have too much money, power, and control. So they came up with a plan. And the plan was, let's make a law, and we're going to present it to Darius, Darius, the book tells us. And the law is that no one, anywhere in the kingdom, is permitted to ask a request of their God for 30 days. For 30 days. It sounds weird, but think of it as a dictatorship, right? You can't worship any other god. Right? Think of it as some Muslim countries, there can't be any synagogues or any churches, right? Or the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire. They pretty much shut down everything else. And this is a way they persuaded Darius. Darius is saying, this is going to consolidate your power. You're new to power over here. You've only just got in. You know what? Don't let anyone else worship anyone else. Anyone else have any requests, they only come to you. They can't pray to their gods. It sounds weird, but this was their plan to basically put a knife in the back of Daniel. Why? Because Daniel is a Jew. And Daniel is someone who prays. And although at this point there wasn't an official prayer service, that's going to come later on during the Second Temple period, and there's no Second Temple yet. That's going to come later at the time of Ezra, after the whole Purim story. People still prayed. And when did they pray? In the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. That we have a tradition for. Where does that tradition come from? From Avraham, who woke up, Vayashkam Baboker, woke up early in the morning to pray, right? And from Yitzchak, what did he do? Such Basadeh, in the afternoon he went to pray and speak to God. And Yaakov, who prayed at nighttime, right? He went and prayed at nighttime. So the idea of prayer morning, afternoon, evening had existed. Plus, in addition to that, we had a temple for 400 years, which King Solomon built. And there were sacrifices in the morning, the shachar. There was the mincha sacrifice. And then at nighttime, they used to burn up the remaining parts. It wasn't its own service. They would do a certain amount of clear up, and that became the evening service. So the 2 main ones were morning and afternoon, and there was an evening one as well. So now we have a problem, because Daniel is famous, and everyone knows that Daniel prays. So what's he going to do? Let's put it this way. Is Daniel allowed, this is a big discussion among the commentaries, and there's many opinions on this, allowed to pray knowing full well that if he does, he's going to get killed? Because that's basically what Darius is doing over here. Are you allowed to risk your life to pray to God? Good question, right? So to worship an idol, not allowed to do that. Give your life up. Yeah. To do forbidden sexual relationships, give your life up. Yarog v'lo yavor. Right? You'd rather be killed than do. That you can't do. So murder you can't do. Forbidden sexual relationships you can't do. But this is prayer. So what should he have done? What did most people in his day do? They just didn't pray. Because if they got caught praying, what would happen? So it tells us, whoever will make a request of any god, small g, or man for 30 days other than you, O king, this is what these two guys tell Belshazzar, shall be thrown into a lion's pit, a den of lions. That was the punishment for transgressing this particular thing. So what does Daniel do? So he goes home and he goes up into the upper stories of his house. He has a certain attic area where we're told there were actually windows. There were windows. Now, as a side point over here, the commentators point out that when a person prays, it's a side point, but it's relevant over here because we see it actually live, you should pray in a synagogue that has windows ideally. Okay, why is that? So Rashi very famously tells us, so that while in the middle of your prayers, right, there you are praying away, and you start to get a bit, like bored and a little bit distracted, you have a window, and you look out of the sky, you're like, oh, that's a beautiful sky, which reminds me, there's a God. So it's okay, if you get distracted in your prayers, to stop and look out of the window in order to see the sky. So we learned that from the rabbis, but actually Daniel did that. Daniel was someone who prayed specifically somewhere where there were windows. This actually transformed a little bit later to say you should ideally have 12 windows, each window representing the 12 tribes of Israel. So if you were to build a synagogue now, you should ideally build a synagogue that has 12 separate windows. And you go traveling around Europe or the Middle East, in Morocco as well, we did a trip over there, you see that each synagogue has at least 12 windows. The Ben Ish Chai brings down a Kabbalistic understanding of saying that once the temple was destroyed, an iron wall was brought down between us and God, because there's no temple anymore. He says, yeah, but if you have a window in a wall, which in those days was probably like a slit in the wall, pretty much, I don't even have panes of glass that we have today, basically saying that God did bring down a wall between us, but even an iron wall has little gaps that you can turn to God, right? Certain windows are never closed. There's always going to be open channels that will be available, such as, for example, when you pray with tears in your eyes, those prayers are always accepted. So those are the various reasons, and we see it live over here that Daniel goes out of its way to say, Daniel learned that the writing had been inscribed, he went home, and the windows were open in the upper story. So he said, I can pray here. Another reason is he had to know which way was Jerusalem. This tradition, and this is important, of praying towards Jerusalem goes back, because now we're outside Jerusalem, but this tradition of facing and praying towards Jerusalem is an ancient tradition that goes back before the Second Temple. Temple's destroyed, I can't be there, at least I should face Jerusalem. And that is precisely what Daniel did. And it says he prayed facing Jerusalem 3 times a day. That was his tradition. And how did he pray? He did something that we do not do pretty much anymore. It's actually forbidden to do. He went down on his knees. Al Berkayim, Barech al Berchoi. He went down on his knees. Actually, the word beracha, I should mention, comes to the word berachani, because when you pray, you have to humble yourself and bend your knees, and you're bending down. It used to be that people used to literally go down on the knees. That was the way people used to pray. And Daniel was doing it over here. We've actually given up on that tradition of doing that, except we do it once a year as a remembrance on Yom Kippur, right? That's the tradition, just as a little shtickle remembrance to it, but really we should do it. And you don't do it on a bare floor. You should not do it on a bare floor. There should be some carpeting over there, or a napkin, or a towel when you actually do that. So he's pretty much keeping the traditions that existed back over there. He obviously felt that he should keep praying. Why? Although it's a death sentence, and you shouldn't give your life up in order to pray, yeah? And according to one opinion was, he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. It says make a request. But if you look at the writing inside Daniel, he was giving thanks to God. So one opinion was, I'm giving thanks. I'm not actually making any requests of God. It actually says he wanted to give Hodah. Prayers to this day follow a very similar pattern. Every prayer we make, and the Amidah that was made many years later follows this pattern, has 3 parts. Part 1 is the first three brachot, which are Shevach, giving praise to God. The middle section, which we have in our Amidah, but it was always the tradition, is Bakashot, making requests of God. And the last section, which we still have today in the Amidah, is Hoda'ah, give thanks. So he was just doing the last section, giving thanks. Maybe that was one of it. The rabbi's trying to find ways to understand why he went out of his way to pray, knowing full well that he was going to get caught and get stuck in a lion's den. Okay? He did get caught. These guys come forward. Oh, by the way, last piece over here, by the way. It says, mitchanen kadam elaha. He went and he supplicated himself. They learn from that word, mitchanen, he supplicated that when you pray, we learn from Daniel, you shouldn't just go, oh God, can I have? You need to supplicate. Well, chenun means to literally be, and they bring down, the Shulchan Aruch says, like a beggar asking a master for money or for any request. You've got to be like a beggar at the door of your master. That's how a person should relate to their tefillah. Okay, we learn this out from Daniel. So he's on his knees and he's still praying and praying very hard. He gets caught. And these two guys, knowing full well he was going to pray, because they know him, right? They go up to Darius, they're like, this guy, he's praying. And there's a law in the land that says you've got to kill him into the lion's den. And Darius says, what are you talking about? I love Daniel. He's my advisor. He's great. And they're like, you signed a decree. You put your royal seal on it. And he used to have a ring with a seal, and it was put down. What would you think if he loved him so much? Just reverse the decree. Just say, well, okay, I signed it, and now, that's not the way it used to work. Once you sign something, it's got to go through. This is very similar, if you remember, to Achashverosh signing off on Haman's decree to kill all the Jewish people. Haman dies, and then Mordechai and Esther are like, please, don't do it. And he's like, I can't reverse it. What, are you crazy? I said I'm going to kill all the Jews. I got no choice. He goes, I'm going to help you. I'll let everyone fight back, and I'll tell them if they do, they may deal with repercussions, but I cannot get rid of the decree. It just shows how these great leaders back then used to hold their decrees very seriously, even if it went against every single fiber of who they were. He realized he'd been tricked, but he had nothing he could do about it. So they grabbed Daniel, and they go to, it wasn't actually a pit, it was actually a cave that was full of ravenous lions. As he's about to walk in, Darius turns around to him and says, he's very upset. Darius is really upset. Elohach di ant palachla v'tidira, the God who always listens to you, yeshezvinach, should save you. Very nice, isn't it? You know what the Gemara learns from this? Do you know what the Gemara learns from this? That a blessing that comes from anyone, even a non-Jewish person is about to throw you into a lion's pit, take it seriously. You never know. And actually he got saved, it's going to sound weird this, in the merit of Darius's prayer. Isn't that crazy? When a person gives you a bracha, even an ordinary person, a hediot, as the Gemara says, a hediot, which like the word idiot comes from the word hediot, a regular person, I'm being serious, and they give you a bracha, they're like, who's this little shmegegi? You're like, amen! Right? Who knows? Maybe this is their time, their mazal. He got saved because of Darius's prayer. Sorry to ruin the ending for you. He does get saved, all right? We know that because there's more chapters to come. So they throw him in, and they take a massive rock, and they say they had to import, I don't know what this means, a rock from miles away to fit over the mouth of this cave. Because there were only small stones in this region, and they schlepped this massive cellar, and they close off this door. Daryavesh, what would be like a great king? Like, he goes home, okay, I'll try my best. He doesn't eat, he fasts, he cries. It's killing him that this has happened and these guys tricked him, but it is what it is. So they throw him inside, and there was a great miracle, and the nature of the miracle is actually discussed and disputed, but in the end, these large and great lions do not devour him at all. One opinion is, which is probably the main opinion, is that an angel came down in the form of a larger lion, entered into the cave itself, and when they saw these lions, saw this larger lion, their mouths were blocked, the Purim area was blocked, and they weren't able to do anything about it. Next morning, actually before it's morning, the king wakes up, gets whatever, a little bit of sleep that night, and he's like, I got to check on Daniel. I got to see if the God of Israel did a miracle to save him. He actually expected it, which is why he went back before daybreak. Pretty impressive, right? So he schleps back to the cave. He has his men remove this massive rock. Before he does, he calls out and cries, Daniel, Daniel, are you alive? Are you alive? And Daniel says nothing. And they say because he didn't recognize his voice. He was so broken by the thought of his favorite advisor, little Jew, right, dying that it completely killed him. He couldn't handle it. And then he said again in a calm voice, Daniel, you in there? And he says, I'm in, I've been saved. They take it and they take him out. And they said, not even a thread on his garment had. He says, nothing happened to me. God, always ascribed it to God, shut the lion's mouth, and they didn't wound me. And thank God I have no harm that is done to me. And the king obviously is really, really, really happy. These other guys are then called forward, the ones who wanted to, these other two kingdoms of Babylonia at that time, they come forward and they're like, that's nothing. It must be that the lions weren't hungry. Right? It must be that a good meal. He's like, no problem. So the book of Daniel tells us he grabbed these two guys and their families and threw them into the... He says that before they even landed in the floor of the cave, they were ripped apart by these lions. So they got their just desserts. And then Darius did something which his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, not a friend of his, did as well. He wrote a letter, and this letter was published and sent around all the kingdoms. Okay, you learn from this, by the way, when a great miracle happens, you should be mefasim, you should spread it. Let people know about it. Right? Pirsum in Nisa, we say on Hanukkah, that's why we light the candles. On Purim, we read the story of Megillat Esther. Over here, it did exactly that. A great miracle happened. Not everyone knew about it. Not everyone was there at the mouth of the cave when he came out that night. But everyone should know that the God of Israel is still with us. And the same thing today. When you see these videos of great miracles happening to soldiers, which we're hearing more and more of because they're coming out now, all these stories should be publicized. They are tremendous Kiddush Hashem, right? And they put the God of Israel in a very, very good light. So all the nations, this is the letter, all the people in the nations and languages who dwell in the entire earth, you should have a lot of peace. An order is hereby issued by me, this is Darius speaking. I have complete kingdom, O kingdom, that you should all tremble and fear the God of Daniel, okay? Who is the living God who endures forever. Tremendous Kiddush Hashem, whose kingdom will not be destroyed, and his kingdom is going to last until the end. The end of what? Even he realized, until the end of days. So although there's going to be a transition into a whole new power base in Persia, which is where the whole Purim story is going to kick in, he's like, that's a temporary thing as well. We have a tradition from Daniel, which we're going to see in the next chapter, next class, God willing, that there are going to be other kingdoms to come afterwards. He's testifying at this point, although Achashverosh is going to have to go through a lot until he gets to that level, that the Jewish people will win out in the end of days when Mashiach comes. And who saves and rescues, performs signs and wonders, great muftim, right? In the heavens and in earth, he saved Daniel from the clutches of the lion. Thus, Daniel met with success in the reign of Darius, and then he died soon afterwards. He didn't rule for that long. And Cyrus, his son-in-law, is going to take over, and he's actually a real Persian, and now the power base starts to move from Babylonia into Persia. We're going to stop over there. Any questions or thoughts on anything that we looked at? I think I covered everything I wanted to discuss. Okay, next class. Oh yeah, okay.
Could you just place Vashti as wife?
Ah, very good. So Vashti, there are different opinions, say that she was actually a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, good point, and what they used to, she was an evil woman. Terrible, terrible person, by the way. I know people joined the Vashti fan club, right, because she was, killed in actually in a very gory way, but we're not told how she killed. But Achashverosh was not from royal blood. And what they were all doing is pretty much like the kings and queens in England and France and Germany and other places around Europe used to do. and to some degree still do, they marry each other off, against their will, by the way, in order to consolidate their power. So Achashverosh, who's not from royal blood, okay, originally married Vashti, although he did actually love her very, very much, kidnapped her as a young girl, right? She was passed through, kidnaps her, and made her his wife as a way to show that he is royalty over here. And that's actually why she rebels against Achashverosh in the Purim story. Right? When he says, come and dance at my party, right? She's like, who are you to tell me what to do? Right? And he calls her Vashti the queen. Bring Vashti the queen. And she says, you better tell Achashverosh at her personal party that Queen Vashti, Mahamalka Vashti, is not coming. So there's political intrigue that spills out into the Purim story based on what's happening over here. Because she's like, excuse me, my grandfather's Nebuchadnezzar, right? How dare you come along and take me, right? I'm royal blood, you're a nothing. You're just a soldier, like dictator, who worked your way up the ranks. So what does he do? Well, Haman says, you're going to have to get rid of her. It's not mentioned explicitly how she dies in the Megillah because he was drunk and he was madly in love with her. And at the end of the story, had he read the book of Megillah Esther, which he did because it was available, Art Scroll published it back then, he would have opened his Art Scroll Megillah Esther and be like, oh my goodness, you made me kill my beautiful wife, right? I'm going to kill you too. This guy's complete mashugana. So that's pretty much happened over there. So that's a residual of this original story over here. Yeah.
So throughout the last three classes, we see tons of open miracles that are shown to the leaders of the non-Jewish world. And they're obviously idol worshippers.
Yeah.
Why don't they start worshiping Hashem? It's pretty obvious that the miracles that are occurring, they're right in front of them.
Right.
Or at least adopt them as one of the gods.
What a great question. Here the question is, look at these people, right? I don't know, they see things are changing. Why can't they change their ways?
Just like Yitro.
Right, so Yitro, Vayishma Yitro is actually held out because he's so unique. He heard Vayishma Yitro, but there's other, Rachav as well. Rachav lived in Israel, lived in the walls, and she lived in Canaan, right? And had a pretty, gross profession over there, right? And she was what? But it was few and far between. And by the way, everyone saw the plagues, and they still went and chased us out of Mitzrayim to try to kill us. And they saw Yam Suf, and they went through as well. There's many ways to answer your question, David. I will say one thing, that whenever an open miracle happens, anywhere in the Torah or Tanakh, there's always a rational, natural explanation. Nothing ever crazy happens. It could be like these guys said they weren't hungry. Right? So he proved you're wrong as well. There's always a rational, every one of the plagues, they couldn't, and people still do, ascribe to natural forces. That's why before the sea split, when we left Egypt, there was this wind that came out of this westerly wind that came all night. Right? People say, of course it split. There's always a rational, God doesn't perform any miracles or allow any prophet to do a miracle unless there is, otherwise your free will is not in check. So people always have free will, and they can choose. Most people, because of money and power and honor, don't want to follow that. But sometimes you have Yitro, you have Rachav, and even Paro, according to our tradition, right? After this whole event of Yam Suf, even he did Teshuvah. But most people, they're just not interested, or they just forget very, very quickly what happened to ancestors. By the way, aren't we the same? Haven't we seen amazing things in our lives, heard about things from Jewish history, our own personal lives, and we still do stupid things, right? So if it's true for us, it's true for them too. All right? Great question, yeah.
Two questions somewhat related. One is, how long were the time periods under the Babylonian and Persian? Like, how many years were they under Babylon? How many years were they
Okay, very, very good.
And then my second question related to that is, I guess, why do we consider the Persian exile a separate exile? Why do we not apply that throughout history, various times?
Great question.
And what would be the purpose of classifying them as two separate
Okay.
exiles?
I haven't read a lot on this. Why do we consider it to be a Persian? Why can't it just continuation? it seems like the dominion of these powers, that's what Yaakov, Jacob saw in his dream ladder, dream thingy, 4 kingdoms. It seems like when you have a consolidated power that controls a large area, including Israel, and either kicks us out or keeps us out, they're considered to be their own dominion. It's interesting. So basically we're going to have Bavel, which we see over here. We're seeing the transition to Paras, Persia. We're going to see during the Second Temple period, the Greeks. Everyone agrees that the Greeks are a major power of knowledge. And they didn't kick us out. They just kicked us out of the temple period, out of the temple environs, right, if you remember. And we managed to fight back, guerrilla warfare in order to get it back. But they're considered to be a malchut. They have a centralized power base, followed by the Romans. Interestingly, Yishmael are not. That's why Yishmael does not have, we'll see next class, Yishmael does not have its own beast that represents it. It's referenced.
What about the Ottoman Empire?
Not enough. It seems to be the Ottomans and others seem to be residuals of those elements. They're not considered to be its own empire. It could have been, but it's not. The power base at that point is still Roman and Christian, right? With the Yishmaelites at that point coming through. But they're so scattered and diverse, the prophets don't consider, they're mentioned, right? The Yishmaelites are mentioned, they're not considered to be their own unified kingdom, which we see, right? They fight each other, right? You have the Shiites and Sunnis, you have these many different factions. You think the Jews are split into groups, right? There's thousands of those little factions, so they're not considered to be one thing, but they are mentioned, which is why even if you remember from 2 classes ago, Daniel saw them as earthenware mixed in with iron. Iron was Rome, Edom, and the earthenware was them, but it wasn't its own powerful base. That was that one. So in terms of the time frames, so Yaakov saw those time frames and they were givens. The only one that does not have a distinct time frame is the Roman exile. And that's why he didn't see that 4th angel on the ladder that represented the 4th kingdom come down. Because we have the ability through teshuvah and tefillah and tzedakah to hasten the redemption. And those are the words of Isaiah the prophet, chapter 60, verse 22, 23, wherever at the end. Ve'ito achishena. There is going to be an end day, but we are able to achishena, bring the end day closer. The other ones, the clock had to tick out. So these 70 years, the clock's ticking. So because they didn't know when to start. Does it start when Nebuchadnezzar takes control? Does it start when the rabbis are kicked out? Does it start when Israel's empty of most Jews? At what point do you start the 70 years? That was a machloket. And Achashverosh is going to have his own version of that calculation for the Megillah story.
So what are the other commonalities between the different dictators? You mentioned that once they sealed the decree, that was it, they couldn't annul it.
Yeah.
They themselves need it.
Yeah.
What are the other rules of, their rulership, so to say?
We don't know. We don't know. We know that he put down this rule. It wasn't changed. We know that Achashverosh made that rule and he didn't change it, though he loved Esther very, very much, and Haman was dead, and he said, I can't change it. Were there other ones that existed? I'm sure. We don't know. We know a few others, actually. In the Purim story, we know. In the Purim story, they weren't allowed to pray publicly, do Brit Milah, keep Shabbat, and even it wasn't until the end that all turned around. And we know that from the words at the end of the Megillah, that's where they had Sason, Simcha. Right? That came back. So there were other rules against Jewish people that they weren't willing to. Once the Gezerah was made, once the decree was made, why were they not willing to reverse these decrees? Because it made them look weak. It made them look weak. Because once you start reversing this one, a new decree comes, he'll reverse that one too. Don't think it's not a democracy. You're dealing with crazy powers over there. They were the judge, jury, executioner. Once you're seen as weak and vacillating, you're done. Once you made a gezerah, a decree in your country, I'm not changing it.
So when did the 70 years start?
Oh, very good. So when does it actually start? So that already is a machloket. That is actually a second one of Jeremiah. There's a second prediction over there. This is the end of Bavel that night, and it started later. It's going to end with the return of the Jewish people at the end of the Purim story. So it's going to be many years later. So it actually started, I think, I've got to check it again, I'm not there yet, but it started about 20, 30 years later when the Jewish people were fully out, when the final refugees came out. That was basically when they removed the Jews from Israel. There were the early exilees of which Daniel was part of them, and they were the important ones. And then someone called Nebuchadnezzar came along, and he took out the later ones. It actually started at that point. So there was a gap in between. Okay, we'll do more about that later on. All right, there will be no class from me next Monday night. I'm going to be doing Kibbutz Avim, visiting my parents in London. I haven't seen them in many, many, many months. Rabbi Bragamov will be speaking next week. I'll be back the week after that to possibly... We may have a guest speaker next week. Surprise? Okay. There will be class here, B'ezrat Hashem. I won't be here. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, B'ezrat Hashem.